The last thing I remember was the sterile scent of a Manhattan boardroom and the screech of tires on wet pavement. I was Maya Vance, the youngest senior partner at a top-tier litigation firm, a woman who ate billion-dollar corporations for breakfast. But when I opened my eyes, the high-rise view was gone. Instead, I was staring at a cracked ceiling in a bedroom that smelled of mold and cheap lavender. My reflection in the dusty vanity mirror was no longer a 34-year-old power player in a tailored suit. It was Chloe, a hollow-eyed 18-year-old with bruises along her collarbones and a look of quiet, permanent defeat. I had transmigrated, or maybe I was insane. But the sharp sting of a slap across my face brought the reality of this new life into focus. "Don't you dare go back to sleep, you lazy brat," Eleanor, my stepmother, hissed. She stood in the doorway, her designer robe a stark contrast to the peeling wallpaper of my room. "The house is a mess, and your brother needs his laundry done before his flight to the Hamptons. Move." Memory fragments of Chloe's life flooded my mind. Years of being the household ghost, a scholarship failure at the prestigious St. Jude's Prep, and the punching bag for Eleanor's frustrations. Chloe had been broken, but Maya Vance was made of steel. I sat up, wiped the blood from my lip, and smiled. It was a cold, predatory expression that made Eleanor take a half step back. "The laundry can wait, Eleanor," I said, my voice steady and devoid of the usual tremor. "I have a phone call to take." Right on cue, my cracked smartphone vibrated on the nightstand. The caller ID showed a Cambridge, Massachusetts number. I put it on speaker. "Is this Miss Chloe Sterling?" a refined voice asked. "This is the Dean of Admissions at Harvard. We've just reviewed your emergency appeal and your proctored SAT retake. Miss Sterling, you've scored a perfect 16-0. Not only are we offering you a full ride, but you've been fast-tracked for consideration for the presidential scholarship." Eleanor's jaw didn't just drop, it practically hit the floor. Her eyes, usually filled with disdain, suddenly flared with a terrifying greed. This was the moment she realized her servant had just become a golden ticket. In the world of the Manhattan elite, a Harvard admission was worth more than gold. It was the ultimate social currency. "A perfect score?" Eleanor whispered as I hung up. Her face twisted into a grotesque mask of fake affection. "Oh, Chloe, darling, I always knew you were bright. We need to call your father. We need to discuss how this scholarship can help the family. Your brother is struggling with his tuition at NYU, and your mother's trust fund is just sitting there, waiting for a family emergency to unlock it." I stood up, towering over her despite being in a teenager's body. "The trust fund is for my education, Eleanor, not for your son's gambling debts." The mask slipped. The war had officially begun. The news of Chloe the failure, scoring a perfect SAT, swept through St. Jude's Prep like a wildfire in a dry forest. When I stepped onto campus the next morning, the silence was deafening. I wasn't the invisible girl anymore. I was a glitch in their carefully curated world. "You cheated." Tiffany, the school's reigning queen bee and daughter of the Board of Education head, blocked my path in the hallway. Her sycophants flanked her, phones out, recording for the inevitable social media takedown. "There is no way a girl who was bottom of the class suddenly becomes a genius," Tiffany sneered, her voice echoing off the lockers. "My father is already looking into the testing center. You're a fraud, Chloe. You're trash from the gutter, and Harvard doesn't take trash." I didn't flinch. I had spent a decade staring down the most intimidating judges in the country. A teenage girl with a spray tan was nothing. "If your father wants to investigate, tell him to start with the donations he took to keep you from being expelled for that hit and run last summer, Tiffany. It's amazing what a little digging into public records can find." The color drained from her face, but she doubled down. Within hours, a coordinated smear campaign hit the school's forums. Anonymous witnesses claimed they saw me buying the SAT answers. The pressure was mounting, but I was busy elsewhere. Back at the house, the atmosphere was toxic. My biological father, a man who had traded his spine for a leaner social standing, sat me down in his study. "Chloe, be reasonable," he said, refusing to look me in the eye. "Eleanor says you're being selfish. Tiffany's father is a powerful man. If you don't drop this Harvard thing and hand over the trust fund to help us smooth things over, he'll ruin us. He'll make sure your perfect score is investigated until it's invalidated. You're asking me to give up my life to protect a woman who treats me like a dog," I asked. I'm asking you to be a team player, he shouted, finally looking up. Allure has debts. Your brother owes money to people you don't want to know. If you don't sign the papers to release the trust fund by Friday, you're out of this house. No money, no roof, nothing. Fine, I said, leaning over his desk. But if I'm leaving, I'm taking everything that belongs to me. I spent that night in a 24-hour internet cafe. I didn't cry, I coded. I used Maya Vance's old offshore account passwords. Luckily, my memory was intact. I didn't have much, but I had enough to hire a consultant to track some very specific documents. I also sent a very tempting, very exclusive crypto investment tip to my stepbrother's private email from an anonymous whale account. He was a greedy idiot. He wouldn't be able to resist using Allure's emergency credit line to bet on a coin I knew was about to rug pull. The week of the Gala for Education arrived, the biggest night on the St. Jude's social calendar. It was a sea of black ties, silk gowns, and backstabbing. Tiffany's father was the guest of honor, and Allure had spent weeks preparing, convinced that this night would secure her son's future and erase her debts. I arrived late, wearing a simple but sharp vintage dress I'd found in the back of my mother's old storage unit. As I walked into the ballroom, the whispers started. I was the lamb walking into the lion's den. Tiffany met me near the stage, a predatory smirk on her face. I hope you enjoyed your 15 minutes, Chloe. My father has the evidence. We're going to play a little video tribute tonight. You might want to watch closely. She thought she had me. Her father had used his connections to manufacture a confession from a fake proctor. They were going to humiliate me in front of the entire Manhattan elite. But Maya Vance always had a backup plan. Earlier that day, my consultant had delivered the Red Room files. While Chloe's mother was dying of a prolonged illness 2 years ago, Allure hadn't been a grieving friend. She had been the one switching the medication. The files contained pharmacy logs and emails between Allure and Tiffany's father, who had helped bypass the medical examiner's oversight in exchange for a cut of the Sterling estate. They hadn't just bullied Chloe, they had murdered her mother for her money. As the lights dimmed for the tribute video, I stood in the back of the room, my hand on a small tablet. Tiffany's father took the podium, looking every bit the prestigious statesman. "Tonight, we celebrate integrity," he began, "and we must also expose those who lack it. We have evidence of academic fraud within our own ranks." He signaled for the video to play. Tiffany was vibrating with excitement. Allure was clutching her pearls, ready to play the disappointed parent. The screen flickered to life, but it wasn't a video of a cheating scandal. The audio echoed through the silent ballroom, crisp, clear, and haunting. It was a recording of Allure's voice from 3 nights ago, screaming at my father. I didn't spend a year slowly poisoning that bitch just for her daughter to take the money to Harvard. Tiffany's father promised us that the trust fund would be ours once he invalidated the girls' scores. We have a deal. Then, the screen shifted to a series of scanned documents. The altered medication logs, the wire transfers between Allure and the Board of Education, and the crypto wallet logs showing my stepbrother losing every cent of Allure's stolen money on a scam. The silence was absolute. Tiffany's father turned ashen. Allure looked like she was having a stroke. I walked slowly down the center aisle, the crowd parting for me like the Red Sea. "Integrity is a funny thing, isn't it?" I said, my voice amplified by the microphone I'd intercepted at the sound booth. "You thought you were burying a failure. You didn't realize you were burying a witness." The chaos that followed was a masterclass in swift justice. The education gala turned into a crime scene within minutes. I had already alerted the DA's office and a contact at the New York Times. As the police entered the ballroom, Tiffany's father tried to flee through the service entrance, but he was intercepted by officers before he could reach the valet. Allure was screaming, hysterical, pointing at me, and calling me a demon. She didn't understand how the quiet, broken Chloe could have done this. She didn't know that Maya Vance was the one holding the strings. "The trust fund is frozen, Allure," I told her as they cuffed her. "And since your son gambled away your emergency funds, you don't even have enough for a lawyer. I'd offer to represent you, but I have a conflict of interest. I'm the lead witness." My biological father stood by the bar, trembling. He looked at me, his eyes filling with tears. "Chloe, please, I didn't know about the medication. I wanted a quiet life. A quiet life built on my mother's grave, I said, my voice cold as ice. You stood by while they destroyed me. You didn't lose a daughter today, you lost an investment. And as of this moment, I'm closing the account. Don't ever contact me again. By the next morning, the headlines were explosive. The Ivy deception was the biggest scandal in New York history. Tiffany's father was charged with racketeering, bribery, and conspiracy. Alina was held without bail for the murder of my mother. My stepbrother was being hunted by the investors he'd borrowed money from to double down on his losses. A month later, I stood on the platform at South Station in Boston. I had packed my mother's old trunk and left the Sterling name behind. Harvard had cleared my name, the presidential scholarship was solidified, and the trust fund, now fully restored, was more than enough for a new beginning. I looked at my reflection in the train window. I still looked like Chloe, but the eyes were different now. They were sharp, focused, and free. A young man in a tweed jacket stopped near me, looking at his map. He looked like a law professor, brilliant, a bit frazzled, and kind. "Excuse me," he said, smiling. "Do you know which way to the law library? I'm new on faculty." I pointed toward the historic brick buildings in the distance. "I'm heading that way myself. I'm a first year." "Bright future ahead," he said, walking alongside me. "You have no idea," I replied. I was no longer my Avance, and I was no longer the broken Chloe. I was something new, something powerful. I had survived a death, a transmigration, and a war. As I walked onto the Harvard campus, the sun breaking over the spires, I knew one thing for certain. The world wasn't ready for what I was going to do next. For the first time in 2 lives, I wasn't just winning a case. I was living my life. Thank you for listening. I hope you enjoyed this video.